All right, so Carson and I did a presentation here for Turkey and Nigeria, the security development and business nexus. All right, so as an introduction, both Turkey and Nigeria face significant terrorism threats and are pursuing economic diversification and development. They both struggle with inclusive development despite their economic potential, and both countries show how security and development are intermingled. When exploring these two countries, we asked ourselves, how does cultural intelligence, political stability, and inclusive development interact to shape business environments and counterterrorism effectiveness? Looking at these two countries shows us how terrorism, inequality, and business development intersect in emerging markets. So for our analytical framework, when looking at global and regional economies, we see that Turkey is a NATO member and an EU candidate. It can also be considered a bridge between Europe and Asia. And then Nigeria is Africa's largest economy, an ECOWAS member, and has an oil-dependent economy. In relation to security and economic globalization, terrorism undermines trade and economic development. And we can use cultural intelligence to understand how ethnic and religious diversity shapes business and security. This allows us to create strategies that are in line with local power structures and societal norms. Things like ethical decision making can be used to help balance security measures with human rights and identify what responsibilities corporations have in regions experiencing conflict. We use cognitive cultural intelligence to develop knowledge of norms, practices, and conventions in different cultures that has been acquired from education and personal experiences. In Turkey, it can be used to understand how the secular government conflicts with Islamic values, as well as the role of the Kurds. In Nigeria, cognitive CQ helps navigate the North-South divide, the dynamics between the Christian and Muslim populations, as well as understand the over 250 ethnic groups and their roles. Cognitive CQ is used to understand cultural knowledge. In Turkey, we can question whether the Kurdistan Workers' Party is a terrorist group or a political movement. We can look at the democratic complexities outside of the Western framework that we are familiar with. In Nigeria, we can use it to question assumptions about failed states versus complex governance systems. It can also be used to understand how the colonial history of a country can shape current systems differently. Motivational cultural intelligence can be used to develop long-term commitment, which is needed despite security risks. It also helps us understand that easy fixes don't work in environments with complex cultural components. In Turkey, long-term commitment is difficult due to a history of coups and inflation, but it is still needed. Nigeria has infrastructure challenges and security risks. People looking to work in the region also need to be motivated to accept the culture of knowing the right person being more important than actually having knowledge about certain areas. In terms of behavioral CQ, that allows us to adapt our actions to specific cultural styles, so such as negotiation styles or business etiquettes. And by doing that, we can be more successful in different cultural environments. Changing our behavior is also useful for respecting religious practices, gender norms, and existing hierarchical structures that may be different in different countries. Turkey has a culture that is heavily based around tea times, and the need to adapt to Muslim prayer times as well. In Nigeria, indirect communications are common. There are elaborate greetings and the need for flexibility surrounding punctuality. And being able to adjust to these can help us find success when working with these different cultures. So, an overview of Turkey's economy. According to World Bank data, the Turkish Statistical Institute, Turkey is considered an upper middle income with a GDP of $905 billion from 2023. Turkey's economy has shifted from being agricultural based to one based on industry. Its economy revolves around manufacturing, textiles, automotive industry, tourism, and construction. They have experienced significant inflation problems, and their currency has currently depreciated. Youth unemployment is around 25%, and there is significant division between urban and rural areas. The business culture is one of high power distances and high uncertainty avoidance, where there is a formal hierarchy in organizations, where those who are not in power are expected to be submissive to those who are. The culture in Turkey is also relationship based, where personal connections are often valued more than knowledge or experience. Key economic initiatives include digital transformation programs, green initiatives, and an export-oriented growth strategy. Um, so, in terms of security and terrorism challenges, Turkey has a unique security landscape. This quote from Mahmoud: Turkey continues to face significant terrorist threats from groups such as the Kurdistan Workers' Party, ISIS, and the Revolutionary People's Liberation Party in front. The PKK, which is the Kurdistan Workers' Party, has been a 40-year insurgency seeking Kurdish autonomy. Turkey faces cross-border threats due to the Syrian civil war, which has created a refugee crisis and a continued threat from ISIS. Turkey's anti-terror law has been criticized for its broad definitions, leaving it open to interpretation. Articles targeting materials related to terrorism have led to prosecution of not only extremists, but also academics, journalists, and political activists. Their counterterrorism framework also focuses on military operations in northern Syria and Iraq, as well as border security. The terrorism climate in Turkey has led to a significant impact on business. Foreigners have been unsure about investing, and the tourism sector has been hurt by bombings. This has led to an increase in insurance premium and educated youth fleeing the country. The counterterrorism climate is further complicated by cultural tensions. Turkey's counterterrorism strategy should incorporate more preventative measures focused on political inclusion, social cohesion, and economic development alongside its hard security measures that it takes. The AKP-controlled government has shifted from a secular state to one that with more conservative values based on strong Islamic identity. Marginalization of the Kurdish minority fuels the PKK insurgency. There is a strong divide in political views between urban and rural areas, and the majority political parties promote nationalism, which conflicts with the regional ethnic identities. Now, moving into an overview of Nigeria's economic situation. Uh, their GDP in 2023 was 477 billion, making it Africa's largest economy. Has a population of just over 220 million. Again, that's Africa's most populous country. It is oil dependent, with oil being 90% of its export earnings and 50% of government revenue. Aside from oil, its other key sectors include agriculture, telecommunications, and financial services. In terms of economic challenges, they struggle with extreme poverty. Um, it has been decreasing in all regions of the world, with the exception of Africa, where about 45% of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa are considerably off track in terms of extreme poverty. So youth unemployment is at 35%. This creates a pool for possible extremist recruitment. And infrastructure deficits are unreliable power grids, poor roads. Um, there's current volatility in foreign exchange shortages. There's corruption issues and the north-south economic divide. There's also some regional disparities. Like I said, there's a divide between the North and South. The South is more developed, better educated, and has commercial centers like Lagos, whereas the North is underdeveloped, has a pretty low literacy rate, and a high amount of poverty. Um, so obviously, the North has been lagging behind in development. Um, in terms of business culture, ethnicity-based trust networks, high personal relationships, similar to what I discussed with Turkey, high uncertainty avoidance, and government connections are essential. So all about who you know. Economic initiatives include the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, the ERGP. They're trying to diversify away from oil dependency, and they're also trying to do a agricultural revival program through the Borrowers Program. In terms of their security profile, they have a significant issue with Boko Haram. Right? According to a recent publication by the Global Terrorism Index, in 2014, the Boko Haram of Nigeria was the deadliest terrorist movement, causing 6,644 deaths, compared to ISIS, which was around lower 6,000s. They have multiple threat groups that they have to be concerned with. Obviously, Boko Haram, which is an Islamic extremist group in the Northeast. The ISWAP, which is the Islamic State West Africa Province, which is an ISIS-affiliated group. They have Niger Delta militants, which frequently attack oil infrastructure and do kidnappings. They have ongoing herder-farmer conflicts over resource competition. This has led to thousands being killed, and also just general banditry, especially in the Northwest, where there's a kidnapping epidemic. Um, so some of the root causes, some of the reasons behind the Boko Haram is being compared to the southern region. The north has been lagging in terms of developing. So a lot of this is going on in the north where that economy is struggling. Additional factors include youth unemployment, like I mentioned, and a general sense of hopelessness among them that there's not a lot of opportunity, weak governance in these peripheral regions, and perceived marginalization of northern Muslims. Um, and then with Boko Haram, Western education is forbidden as part of their ideology. Um, Counterterrorism response, it's again a very military focused approach. They have a multinational joint task force with Chad, Niger, Cameroon, and Benin. They have been criticized for human rights abuses during their actions. They have taken some soft approaches, including de-radicalization programs and economic development initiatives. So, in terms of impact on business, the Northeast economy has been devastated. Over 2 million internally displaced people. Agricultural production collapsed in affected areas. There's insurance is unavailable in conflict zones. International businesses avoid these high-risk regions. The cultural dimensions there, I've mentioned that there's a Christian-Muslim tension. There's over 250 ethnic groups in the country, each with their own competing interests. The North-South political rivalry and colonial borders that create artificial unity. So here are our key findings when comparing the two countries. Um, Both face terrorism rooted in economic exclusion and identity politics. Both have significant regional inequality fueling instability. Both pursue military-heavy counterterrorism strategies with limited soft power approaches. Both have vibrant entrepreneurial cultures constrained by institutional weaknesses. And both demonstrate how non-inclusive development creates security threats. Key differences: Turkey has a much stronger state capacity and infrastructure system. Nigeria's terrorism is more deadly and territorially extensive. Turkey's terrorism is more politically motivated, while Nigeria's is more poverty driven. And Turkey is closer to a developed world standards, whereas Nigeria faces basic economic development challenges. Um, Move on to.
So, looking at the terrorism development stability nexus for Nigeria, some of the terrorism that's occurring is the murdering of state security forces, kidnappings, physical property damage. There's religious violence, and this results in driving people from their homes. And overall, this just challenges the overall authority of the government. but due to terrorism, it causes issues with the overall stability of Nigeria. It questions the government's legitimacy by the citizens of the country and the international community. It causes various communities in the country to question if they are safe under the protection of the Nigerian government. And to the international community, it raises questions if Nigeria is weak, worth partnering with, or investing in. Stability is also disrupted through sectarian violence, kind of as Tom was touching on. You have various religious sects that are combating with each other and trying to gain the most influence without the country. Finally, it displaces populations of people within the country, resulting in further instability. Also, due to terrorism and stability issues, the question of development is harmed because it challenges educational infrastructures. Children are being kidnapped, schools are burned, and violence from terrorists are making it hard for education to occur. It also disrupts the future and current workforce. Children cannot learn, meaning they won't have the skills or knowledge capable to fulfill more civilized jobs in the future. And currently, the workforce is scared that if they go to work, they could be harmed, killed, or kidnapped. And finally, this all results in economic disruption. It occurs because resources are being reverted to combating terrorism, paying ransoms, and rebuilding the destruction that has been caused by terrorism and everything else that is occurring in Nigeria. So now looking at the terrorism development stability nexus for Turkey, Turkey faces both internal and external terroristic threats from groups like ISIS, the Kurdish Democratic Union Party or PYD, and the Kurdistan Workers' Party PKK. It causes issues with stability because efforts must focus on fighting two different fronts, and it also questions the government's legitimacy, similar to Nigeria, to keep its own citizens safe. Civilians are uncertain if they are safe or not when going to work or traveling about the country. In terms of development, resources are spread out between the two front war against terrorism. Instead of resources going to infrastructure, education, or other social services, they're being redirected to fight terrorism. As Tom mentioned, they have a very militaristic approach, which is not cheap in combating terrorism. The multi risk of terrorism in Turkey also raises concerns for foreign investments in the country. They face more than a singular threat, which just adds to the uncertainty of becoming involved in the country investment wise. It also reduces the investment from the Turkish government into their own country. They're stuck trying to fight these battles against terrorism instead of investing in the infrastructure, education, etc. There's also a foreign disagreement on the description of the Kurds as terrorists, which Tom mentioned is kind of a political terrorism in a fashion. So this could possibly result in foreign intervention or reduction of help to Turkey. In both Turkey and Nigeria, the nexus allows a cycle to develop. Violence leads to instability, instability to underdevelopment, and underdevelopment leads to grievances. These grievances can create future violences, starting this entire cycle or nexus over again. So looking at some of the recommendations for US businesses that are looking to move into Turkey or Nigeria, they can focus on industries that have already been established in the country and have gotten success. For Nigeria, this can include oil, tech, or infrastructure. And Turkey, this could be manufacturing, agriculture, or even tourism. And this tourism is going to be more domestic because currently the international tourism is not fond of Turkey, and there's still a high threat level. They can avoid sectors of high risk. So areas where there's lots of fighting or terrorism. So the border of Syria with Syria and the northeast region of Nigeria can be avoided by US businesses. They can also partner with locals utilizing CQ to gain the respect and understanding of what is going on in the country and how they should operate in a fashion that does not disrespect or harms the local communities. They also need to invest in security because, as we've mentioned throughout this, both of these countries are facing terroristic threats. So, if they can invest in high levels of security, they can protect their businesses a lot more. Also, they can look to hire the younger population. Over half the population in Turkey is under the age of 30. So this is a lot of young minds that can either be altered through radicalization or they can stay straight and narrow and join the legal workforce and do good for the country as a whole. And as I said, it reduces the chances of radicalization in Nigeria and Turkey together. So, looking at the recommendations for US policymakers and security personnel, there needs to be intelligence sharing. We can help them to understand what threats are being faced in the country, which will help the US businesses in turn. We can also help in the training of local police and military personnel. Uh, and then policies should focus on building. So we should look to invest in the infrastructure of the countries, the education of the population that is young, and humanitarian relief from the terroristic threats that these two countries face. And they should incentivize or encourage the hiring of the youth populations. If you can take the youth away from terrorism, you're cutting out one of the most vulnerable populations that terrorism and terrorist organizations look to radicalize. So we can also incentivize U.S. businesses to expand to Turkey and Nigeria. You can offer tax cuts or uh, trade agreements and such with Turkey and Nigeria to have U.S. businesses come to these countries to help build them up. And finally, we can establish requirements for Turkish and Nigerian partners for U.S. businesses that are established in a given country. So you can have a U.S. business form, but it has to be through a Turkish and Nigerian partner. So this country feels like they are involved, and we're just building up the CQ that we talked about earlier. And that is our references, and thank you for listening.